Hey gang, it's been a while since I've made a video. I'm making a second video on canine drug searches. There's a new item that came out from the Institute of Justice regarding a drug dog search in an individual. I will be including that in this video, and at the end of the video there will also be an attorney speaking on multiple ways that drug dog searches can be challenged in court. Again, I'm not giving legal advice. This is just for informational purposes. It's worth studying. So if there's a challenge to be had or if there's an issue, then you can take it from there. All right, guys. God bless America and God bless our troops. Flying Auditor, we're out.
Each step along the way, not just the officer, but his manager that called me, the internal affairs department.
Something's going on. I'm telling you,
they all trashed everything and said everything was justified.
He's defeated. I'm really hoping.
I hadn't done anything wrong.
This police officer in San Antonio, Texas, stopped Alex Schott while he was driving home from a work trip and ended up ransacking his car to look for drugs.
My name is Alex Schott. I live in Houston, Texas, with my wife and 2 young sons.
Police are supposed to keep us safe, but they should also be held accountable when they violate our rights. Let's roll the tape and see whether this officer complied with the Fourth Amendment. We'll use a reasonable suspicion meter to help us out. More on that later.
Hey, how you doing, brother? Hey, my name is Joel. I'm with the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. The only reason I'm stopping you is when I was watching over there, you were drifting over that fog line pretty hard. I just want to make sure everything's okay.
Police can't just stop and detain you to fish around for evidence that you might be doing something wrong. The Fourth Amendment requires that they have reasonable suspicion, objective evidence that you've committed a crime. Otherwise, they have to let you go.
The only reason I'm stopping you is when I was watching over there, you were drifting over that fog line.
Here, the officer said the only reason he stopped Alec was because he was drifting over the fog line. But this is a video from Alec's personal dash cam before he was stopped. I don't see any drifting there, do you? Because we're still in fishing expedition territory, the stop and everything after it violates the Fourth Amendment.
Hey, I'm gonna have you step out and sit in my passenger seat while I do your warning, okay? Thanks a lot, man.
When I was pulled over and asked to get out of the car, I was immediately confused because it was not a standard practice from what I've normally experienced with the license and registration process. I was really astounded and very uneasy.
At this point, the officer orders Alec into his patrol car so that he can issue a warning. But if lane drifting was the only reason for the stop, the officer was required to deal with that violation promptly and then let Alec go. The officer's body cam shows that he ran Alec's license plate before pulling him over, and the incident report shows that the officer ran a background check on Alec less than a minute after they entered the patrol car. Alec has never been in trouble with the law, so the checks would have come back clean. At this point, the officer was constitutionally required to issue a warning and let Alec go, but he didn't. The officer interrogated him for over 10 minutes about the purpose of his trip and whether there were illegal drugs or large amounts of cash in his car. Alec calmly and truthfully explains that he's driving home from a work trip and there's nothing illegal in his car. In other words, he acts exactly the way you'd expect any normal, law-abiding citizen to act.
where was your customer at? Damn, how far is that from here? What hotel did you stay at? When was the last time you came down this way? You like Houston? So your name is Scott, S-C-H-O-T-T. Oh, Schott. I think it was his name. And what in your address? Yep, that's cool. And date of birth? Has this been your truck from the beginning? What year is it? It's horrible. What's your phone number, sir? You live in a house or an apartment? And then what was it you were working on with your customer here? So you brought out the equipment to him? So you just kind of go there and tell him about it? Did you go over there with anybody else? Have you ever been in trouble with anything? Is your wife? Is that your mom? Do you have anything in your vehicle that you're not supposed to have? Do you have any marijuana in the vehicle? Any cocaine? Any heroin? Any THC oil? THC rat? Vapes? Anything of that nature? Okay. Any types of methamphetamine, being crystal or liquid? Any pills that aren't prescribed to you? any hallucinogens, being THC oil, THC wax, anything like that. Do you have any large sums of money over $10,000? Do you have any types of anything illegal? Has anybody asked you to carry anything in your vehicle? And are you the only person that's driven this vehicle for the last 48 hours? Okay.
We're now over 10 minutes into the stop, and our meter is still frozen in fishing expedition territory. We're about to learn what's really going on.
What I am is I'm on what's called a criminal interdiction unit. So I don't have to deal with all that crap. I don't give tickets, I give warnings. And the main reason is I sit on the side of the highway and I'm out here looking for, because it's bad out here. I'm out here looking for big human smuggling, drug smuggling, and all those things like that. So that's what I'm doing.
Here the officer admits that the stop was never really about traffic. It was about finding big. That's a problem. When police decide in advance that you must be some kind of criminal, whether a drug dealer or anything else, the result is a conspiratorial mindset under which police can spin anything you do as suspicious. Acting nervous? Suspicious. Acting too calm? Also suspicious. Direct eye contact? No eye contact? Talking too much? Not talking enough? All suspicious. There really are no limits to what police will argue in an effort to get around the Constitution.
Would you allow me to search your vehicle? Okay.
When he asked to search my car, I told him no. I knew I'd done nothing wrong, and I shouldn't have to explain why I shouldn't be treated like a criminal.
So what I'll do is we have a canine pretty close, so I'm gonna have a canine come out and do a walk around your vehicle. That way it'll go quicker. But just I have some reasons to believe that there might be something in your vehicle. I've been wrong before, but there's just some things I'm seeing that makes me want to go a little further with the investigation, okay? So that's what we're gonna do. I'll wait for a canine. The canine will walk around the outside of your vehicle. If it alerts to anything, then we'll do a search of the vehicle.
Alec refuses consent to search his car, not because he's hiding anything, but because these sorts of searches can be extremely intrusive and even damage your property. We're now far beyond the bounds of a legal traffic stop, but the officer claims to have seen some things that make him want to keep going. So he doubles down. He calls a drug dog to the scene to see if that will give him an excuse to search Alec's car.
Okay, so he got a positive alert on your driver's side door. Is there anything small that you know of? I'm gonna have you sit in the back seat while I search. I'm not gonna put handcuffs on you or nothing, right? But you are detained because of the positive alert. If we don't find nothing in there, then you'll be good to go, man. Okay? You have any questions? All right. Yeah, it's 5 in number.
The drug dog finally arrives, and the officer claims he gives a positive alert. That means the canine officer thinks the dog can smell drugs in the car. If the stop had been legitimate up to this point, then the alert might have given the officers probable cause to search Alec's car. But the drug dog never should have been called in the first place because, again, there was no basis for the stop or for suspecting Alec of a crime. So the positive alert couldn't have cured the constitutional problems. It could only make them worse by extending an already illegitimate stop.
I don't know anything about like how the dogs work, but
yeah, he wanted to get in there. He sat hard. I tried walking away. He started whining and barking.
As I was watching them search my car from the back of the squad car, I felt violated. Opening up the glove box, taking out my tools and my work equipment, all of my personal property was being searched through.
For the next 25 minutes, the officers ransack Alec's car, opening every compartment and tossing every bag. They find work gear. They find car seats. They find Chipotle and M&M wrappers, the sort of thing that any American might have in their car. The one thing they don't find is any drugs or any other evidence of crime.
okay, sir. We're done. I'm gonna give you this before I forget. Yeah, and then your warning. We took off your car seats so that we could get under the seat.
Well over an hour after Alec was pulled over for a made-up traffic violation, the officer finally stops searching his car and says he's free to leave. What's notable here is the officer's admission that he searches cars like this all the time, but rarely finds anything.
But like I said, I try not to be a jerk about things because 9 times out of 10, this is what happens. So
That's outrageous, but hardly surprising. When police target innocent people without any reason to believe they've done something wrong, and gin up reasons to ransack their cars, the only ones violating the law are the officers themselves.
I did everything right, and the police still treated me like a criminal. This case is about providing accountability back to the Sheriff's Department, not just for the stop, but the whole process afterwards. For months, even internal affairs and management who contacted me said everything was justified and that they had the right to search my vehicle. When IJ called me back and said they were moving forward with my case, it finally felt like my rights mattered.
With IJ's help, Alec is filing a lawsuit to hold the officer accountable for violating his rights. Because if we, the people, have to follow the law, our government must follow the Constitution.
Drug dog myth number 1, high sense acuity means higher reliability. I'm Tulsa Attorney James Worth. I'm doing a series regarding myths related to drug dogs, specifically in Oklahoma, but also elsewhere. And this first one is that because they are very good at smelling, the better they can smell, the higher the reliability in detecting drugs and determining probable cause for a search after a vehicle is stopped. So basically dogs in Oklahoma, canines, can be used as kind of a probable cause machine because we're talking about Fourth Amendment issues. That's where we've got somebody who is driving down the road, they get pulled over by police based on a bag tag or something. So there's some legal basis for the stop, but then the officer wants to search the vehicle. And the Fourth Amendment is pretty clear. If you don't have a warrant, then a search is per se unreasonable under the Fourth Amendment unless it falls within certain exceptions. One of those exceptions being the automobile exception. And that says that since the car is mobile, the officers can't wait to get a warrant because the car is going to be gone by then. However, it's not just that it's an automobile that gives you enough for the exception. You also have probable cause. So it's automobile plus probable cause. So how do you get that probable cause? That's where the drug dog comes in. They run a drug dog around, they allege that it alerts, and that sniff, that open air sniff outside of the vehicle, that is determined not to be a search under the Fourth Amendment. So it does not violate Fourth Amendment, so they can do that without a warrant. And then if it alerts, then they determine that that is probable cause to go ahead and do the search without court oversight till later. So that's what we're talking about here. The myth is that because dogs have very high acuity in their sense of smell, that means that they are more reliable. But that is a myth. And it's a myth because their sense acuity is actually so high that it causes lots of problems. We see lots of circumstances where a drug dog may alert, but no contraband is found. And the response to that is that they'll get is, well, there must have been something in there previously, or there must have been some sort of transference. Basically, there's a minute amount of the scent, and that's what the dog is smelling, but it could cause them to alert when there's not actually any contraband or crime being committed. So we've actually done some prelims on this recently where we've had handlers for canines testify that, if there is, a crackhead at Walmart who's trying to open up all these cars, see which cars open, just by the fact of grabbing that door handle, that's going to put enough scent on that car that a drug dog could alert to it. Their sense of smell is so good that it means they're alerting when there isn't even contraband, there's just a slight smell of contraband. Sometimes people say, I think there's scientific reports out there that indicate that the dogs can smell 40 times better than humans. But we've seen people testify, handlers testify, they can smell 100 times better, 1,000 times better, even 1,000,000 times better. But the fact that they can smell better and more does not make it more reliable for determining whether there's probable cause that a crime has been committed. And that is where this is a myth. The fact is that sense of smell and its acuity in the sense of smell is so high, it decreases the reliability because they are alerting where the amount is so small that it's not contraband, it's not illegal, it's not a crime that's being committed. So that is our first myth being busted there regarding drug dogs. If you are involved in a scenario where you're being prosecuted based on a drug dogs alert, you may want to look into that more closely. You're certainly going to want to talk to an attorney about that. To get that scheduled with somebody at my office, you can go online to makelawEasy.com. Drug dog myth number 2, there are no false positives. I'm also attorney James Worth doing a series regarding myths related to K9 units testing for drugs. And this myth is that there are no false positives. And that's something that we hear a lot when we're dealing with these cases in court. We're cross-examining handlers, K9 officers. They will tell you there's no such thing as a false positive. My drug dog is, 100% accurate all the time. That's the myth. That is what they want you to believe, and they use a little bit of fancy footwork in order to get them there. So essentially what it means is that anytime their drug dog alerts, they search a vehicle, but they don't find narcotics, they don't find contraband, they don't find an arrestable offense or a crime being committed, they don't consider that to be a false positive. They don't mark that. They don't keep record of that. They only keep records of when they actually do find contraband and they actually prosecute somebody. And that's the only time it actually gets court oversight and attorneys get involved to make sure that rights are not being violated. If they pull somebody over and they put the dog around, they allege the dog alerts, and they do a search and they don't find anything, well, they say, oh, that person's free to go. They don't have to hire an attorney. That doesn't have to go to court. They don't keep record of it when that happens. And when you talk about those circumstances as being a false positive, they're going to say that's not a false positive. There's no such thing as a false positive. Under that circumstance, the dog was actually smelling what it's trained to smell. That's why it alerted. So it was smelling, methamphetamine, heroin, marijuana, cocaine, but it was in such trace amounts there wasn't actually contraband there, because they'll say that it could be transference where somebody had the smell on them and they were in that vehicle and they left that vehicle and the smell was left behind. Or it could be that they smelled cocaine on money that was on somebody in the vehicle or in the vehicle. Studies have shown up to 90% of US currency have trace amounts of cocaine on it. The dogs can smell so well that they can smell that even though no crime is being committed, they're going to alert to it. So we would say that that's a false positive, but they will testify under oath that is not a false positive. There must have been narcotics there and it was correctly alerting to that. And there's no oversight. There's no one actually trying to see if that's the case. Do we have a dog that's completely inaccurate? Or do we have a dog that is smelling trace amounts of something that is not enough for humans to find and then prosecute? And with no oversight over that, when there is a false positive, or what we'd call a false positive, we don't know what the accuracy of the K9 units are. What we can see is that the Chicago Tribune actually analyzed this issue related to cases in Illinois from 2007 to 2009, and they were actually looking for cases where there was an alert and nothing was found. They found only in 44% of cases where a drug dog searched and alerted did they find contraband, drugs, or paraphernalia. So even when the officer was wanting to do a drug dog search, which keep in mind, they don't do those on everybody. They only do that where they think there's something to be found. And they ran the dog and the dog alerted. Only 44% of the time, less than half the time, did it find something. So the accuracy of those dogs in that case, less than 50% of the time are they accurate. The other thing is that these dogs are tested for accuracy when they're trained, but there's no follow-up for that. So that could increase the chances of there being false positives. So because the officers don't believe in a false positive, anytime in the field the dog's alert, the dog gets the treat being a toy to play with, and that's part of the training. So it reinforces the behavior not of correctly identifying whether there are narcotics in a vehicle, but just in the alert itself, because every single time it alerts, it gets a reward in the field, whether there's narcotics found or not, because again, they don't believe there's ever such a thing as a false positive. If the dog alerted, that means there was definitely the scent, even if there wasn't the actual contraband, which means that when they're outside of training, the farther they go, the more likely it is that they're going to be alerting for the purposes of getting a reward rather than actually based on the smell, because there's no reinforcement of what they learned when they went through their initial training. So that is the second myth that we're talking about for drug dogs. There's no such thing as a false positive. There is definitely false positives. It's just that nobody looks at them. Nobody keeps track of them. There's no oversight over them because they've been trained to say there's no such thing as a false positive. A false positive just means that we weren't able to find what the dog actually smelled. If you're dealing with the circumstances of a case related on a stop and the use of a drug dog, you're going to want to talk to an attorney about what can be done, whether that dog actually provided legitimate probable cause or whether there are grounds to get perhaps evidence suppressed because it was unlawfully obtained. If you want to get something scheduled with my office, you can go online to makelawEasy.com. Drug dog myths number 3. Drug dogs are highly trained and accurate. I'm Tulsa attorney James Worth. We're doing a series related to drug dogs and the myths associated with them, this myth being that they are highly trained and accurate. And specifically, this video deals with subjective and contradictory alerts. So K9 and their handlers do train together, and they have to pass some certain threshold to get out in the field, but they may not be trained the way that you think that they're trained, and they may not be as highly trained and competent as the general public would believe. So canine dogs and drug dogs in Oklahoma are generally trained to alert on 4 different substances: marijuana, methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine. So the dog is trained to identify those, smell those, and then make some sort of alert. Now, if we really wanted accuracy and we really wanted to test how accurate the dogs were, perhaps we would have a different alert based on the different thing they're identifying. So if they smell heroin, they do some certain action. If they smell cocaine, they do another action. But they don't do that. No matter what they're smelling that they think is supposed to be an alert, it doesn't have a different alert for that. So they can't communicate that to the officer. Okay, what that means is they've set it up so there's no way in the field to determine the accuracy of the dog. If the dog alerts and no narcotics are found, then they're going to say that the narcotics were previously in there, or it's trace amounts on a dollar bill, or it's, somebody was in the vehicle previously, maybe they were smoking some marijuana, they only had it in their clothes, or they work at a dispensary and they had it on their clothes. Whatever the case may be, if the dog alerts but nothing is found as contraband in the vehicle, they're not going to say that's a false positive. They're going to say that the dog accurately smelled something in trace amounts that we can't now find. So what if they had the dogs trained so that they identified the particular type of drug? Well, that's a problem, because then if the dog falsely alerts to heroin and they find cocaine, that's a case that they charge. That's a case that gets oversight, defense attorneys involved, preliminary hearings put on where judges have to make determinations, and then we, the public, defense bar, judges, get to see these dogs are not accurate. But if they set it up that the alert's always the same, when the drug dog falsely alerts, there's no court case for that. There's no oversight. When the drug dog does alert and does find something, then there is a court case, but it always appears to be accurate because they alerted and something was found. So by throwing away all of the false positives and only focusing on the cases where they're actually prosecuting, there's no way to determine if there is reliability because there's only one alert rather than alert for each particular item. So that's the first thing, is that they don't tell you what they're alerting for in order to prevent oversight on that. The other thing is that there's not a clear basis for alerts. It's very subjective. They don't talk about that, okay? So if we've got a highly trained dog, you would have it alert in a very specific way. So it would smell something and it would sit down, or it would bark 3 times, or whatever, something very specific. But what we see when we're cross-examining handlers is that they're trained to alert a lot of different ways, sometimes in contradictory ways, and certainly in subjective ways, to where it's the handler testifying whether it's alert, and it's unclear, even if you're watching video of the dog doing the stop, which we've seen many of those videos, and many times we're not seeing any alerts at all. We're seeing normal dog behavior. But we recently had a prelim and we hear things like this. An alert means a change in behavior. Any change in behavior by the dog, they testify that could potentially be an alert. So they talk about if the ears are pointing, if the dog is chambering, meaning taking deep breaths, if they call it bracket sniffing, moving around, getting different scents, those could all be alerts. And then we have contradictory ones. Just had an officer testify, if the dog is moving towards a scent, then that is an indication that they are smelling narcotics. But then he later testified, if the dog's moving away from a scent, then that means that it's a large amount of narcotics and they're moving away. So if the dog moves toward, it's positive for a small amount of narcotics. If it moves away, positive for a large amount of narcotics. He successfully set up a catch-22. No matter what the dog does, goes forward or away, he says that is a positive alert for narcotics to give him probable cause to search a vehicle. Then similarly, if the dog lowers his head, then that is an alert. But also, in this same case, he testified that if the dog, stares, sits and stares, stands and stares, that is an alert. So if the dog has his head up staring, it's an alert. If the dog puts his dog down, not staring, that's an alert. Also, we've seen, and this is in a different case, where sitting up is an alert. Sitting down is an alert, but also jumping up on a vehicle is an alert. Contradictory. No matter what, in a lot of these cases, based on the testimony that we get, there's so many behaviors that are subjective to the trainer to determine whether it's alert. Anything can be an alert that the officer potentially wants it to be alert, and there's very little oversight on this. So, and it's not just that different dogs are trained differently to alert. This is one dog, two dogs, giving examples here, that were trained as potentially to alert in all these different ways. Any change in behavior can potentially be an alert to a handler. So I wouldn't call that highly trained, and I would not call that accurate. And I think most people believe that there are accurate, distinct alerts where anybody watching a video would note, oh, the dog alerted there. That is not the case. It is very subjective, and that's why it is a myth that canines are highly trained and accurate. In actuality, the purpose of the dog is to get probable cause. And that is what they are trained to do, and they're initially trained, and they get out. They're tested, but they're not tested in the field. They get a reward every time they alert, and therefore it incentivizes them to alert, not to be accurate, and there's no oversight over false positives because we only see the cases where narcotics are found. Those are the only ones that are charged, only ones where people hire attorneys. So if you're dealing with a case like this, you're going to want to talk to an attorney privately and confidentially to get legal advice. If you'd like to schedule that somebody in my office, you go online to Make Law Easy. Drug dog myth number 4, drug dogs alert to drugs, not handlers. I'm also attorney James Worth. We're doing a series of videos related to myths about drug dogs, and this one deals with what they're actually alerting to. So they are trained to smell narcotics and alert to narcotics, but are they alerting to narcotics or are they alerting to their handlers? This video is regarding cueing and whether the relationship between the handler and the dog can affect how it alerts and when it alerts. So when we're looking at getting drug dogs, when people are getting drug dogs, there's a number of factors that they look at. One, obviously you want a dog that has a very acute sense of smell. There are certain breeds that are better for that than others, and that's why they use those breeds. But also it is about the dog's individual personality and its playfulness. How much does the dog like to play? Because in doing these drug dog sniff test searches, that is a game to the dog that the dog likes to play, and having dogs that like to play make them better drug dogs. But this is a game that is not played alone. It is a game that is played with the handler and the interaction of the handler. And when the dog alerts, the dog gets a reward. In the field, it's every time the dog alerts, no matter accuracy or anything, because they don't actually check the accuracy or anything. If there's an alert in the field, it is considered to be a correct alert whether narcotics are found or not, and the dog gets gets a reward whether narcotics are found or not. So it incentivizes the dog to alert. So what is the dog alerting to then? Is the dog alerting to specific smells, or is the dog alerting to what the officer believes whether there are narcotics in the vehicle and where in the vehicle the officer believes? So this was actually looked at in a study. Now, most of the time, different drug dog handlers, police agencies, they do not want their dogs tested. They do their testing when they are certified, and then they have them out in the field. They don't want third parties coming in and testing their accuracy. And like I said, if they have a search where it alerts and nothing is found, they consider that still to be a good alert. There just must have been a trace amount of drugs, nothing that we could find, but the dog could smell. They would say there's no such thing as a false positive. But there was a study done on this. They did get some of these units in order to participate. And there's a study on that. It's called Handler Beliefs Affect Scent Detection Dog Outcome by Lisa Witt, Julie Schwitzer, and Anita Oberbauer. And that's from, looks like December 13th of 2010. And this is an interesting study where they told the handlers of the dogs, they told them falsely that 2 conditions contained paper marking scent location. And then they also had 2 conditions where they had decoy scents basically they had food like a sausage or a tennis ball. So they had a space that noted a piece of paper so that the handlers would believe that that is potentially something, and then they had actual sense that was a sausage or a tennis ball to see if the dogs would alert. So the purpose of the test was to see, one, the accuracy of the dogs, but two, did they have a tendency to alert more where the officer thought there would be a scent, or to where the dog smelled something that is not narcotics but is something that it would want, such as food or a play toy. So they did 225 runs of this, and the secret to this is that there were no actual narcotics throughout the entire thing. So the human handlers were led to believe that this paper marking was something they were supposed to potentially alert on, but in actuality, there was nothing to alert on through the whole thing. Out of 225 runs, the dogs alerted 85% of the time. So 85% of the time, even though it should be 0% of the time. But the interesting part that they wanted to look at is, where did the dog alert most? Did it alert where the officer thought that there would be narcotics? Did it the control where there was nothing, or in these spots where the dog would smell something the dog would like to smell? And the number one place where the dogs would alert is where the officers thought there was a smell. So the officer bias affected the dog's alerts more than the dog's bias towards getting the tennis ball or the sausage. And 85% of the time they alerted when there was nothing there. So that begs the question, are dogs alerting based on what they smell, or are they alerting based on cues, either given intentionally or unintentionally by their handlers that they are playing this game with and intently focused on in order to win this game, in order to get that toy they play with as their reward? So that is the question that we have, or the issue that we have on this myth. If you are dealing with a case where you're being prosecuted based on alert from a drug dog, that is something that should probably be attacked. Is it proper that they're giving probable cause in your case? Are there grounds to get evidence suppressed based on a violation of your rights? You're going to want to talk to an attorney privately and confidentially about that. To get that scheduled with somebody at my office, you go online to makelaweasy.com. Drug dog myths number 5. Canine officers are highly trained and professional. I'm Tulsa attorney James Worth, doing a series of videos related to drug dogs in Oklahoma, and specifically debunking certain myths. The myth being here that canine handler officers are highly trained and professional. All right, so first off, in order to be a canine officer in Oklahoma, the officer handler and the dog would go through training, meet certain scores, and then be certified and be out on the streets. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are highly trained or professional. As we discussed in previous videos, when we're talking about how a dog alerts, we've had officers testify that any change of behavior is alert. We've had them testify to contradictory statements, that moving towards a smell is alert, moving away from a smell is alert, jumping up is an alert, sitting down is an alert. Anything can be an alert. It is not a strict science and is very subjective to the officer. Additionally, we've seen some bad, or at least poor behavior by canine officers in videos that we receive. When somebody gets pulled over for a traffic stop and they want to search that vehicle, they have to have a warrant or an exception to the warrant requirement. The exception being that it's an automobile, mobile, and that they have probable cause. Well, how do you get probable cause? You do it through a drug dog alerting, and that's where the drug dogs come in here, and that's where we have them walk around, and then we have the alleged alert with the change in behavior and all the contradictory things that they can argue is an alert to give them the probable cause to get in. But in reviewing those videos to see what the conduct of the officers, we've seen some interesting things. I saw one case that we were dealing with where the the officer opened the door to let the dog jump in. Now, this is before they had alleged that there's any kind of alert, before the dog had finished the sweep, and the officer opened the door, the dog jumped in and started eating my client's lunch. And then on the tape, my client asked him, why, how'd the dog get in the vehicle? He's eating my lunch. And the response was, he gave a long story on how the dog had trained itself to be able to open up the car door. And he asserted that the dog opened the door itself, when in the video you can see the officer opened it. But my client didn't see that. But that's the story that he's getting from the officer that just allowed the dog to jump in his car and eat his lunch. So it's not always highly trained as far as having a distinct way to handle these, a distinct alert from the dog that is not subjective. No, these officers have decided to take their time that they want to search this vehicle. So they already have suspicion that there's something in the vehicle. They want to search it, and they need the dog in order to get the probable cause to do so. So they're incentivized to want the dog to alert. And the dog that is trained to play this game with the officer is incentivized to alert, because in the field, after they're done with training, anytime they alert, they get their treat, they get their toy, they get their reward, no matter if it's a false positive or not, because in their training, there's no such thing as a false positive. Either they alert and we find contraband, or they alert and we don't, which means that the contraband was in there and now it's gone. So there's no such thing as a false positive for them, so the dog gets rewarded every time they alert. So the officers inclined to want the dog to alert, the dog is inclined to alert, and it ends up in this probable cause machine that gets them what they want, and there's no oversight over it, because if they alert and they find narcotics, those are the only cases anybody sees. Those are the ones that need to hire defense attorneys, that go to court, that have oversight through judges. If the dog alerts and nothing is found, that person goes about their way. They don't bother hiring an attorney. They don't have to go to court. So there's no oversight over those. So what we have is a system that is not as scientific, not as sound, not as highly trained, and not as professional as the general public probably believes, which is why this myth is that canine officers are highly trained and professional. If you're dealing with this circumstance in a criminal case based on a probable cause from a canine, there may be grounds to challenge that. You want to talk to an attorney about that privately and confidentially to find out the specifics of your circumstances and what can be done for you. To get that scheduled with someone in my office, you can go online to makelaweasy.com. Drug dog myth number 6, the legalization of medical marijuana in Oklahoma doesn't change anything. I'm Tulsa attorney James Wortham, doing a series of videos related to drug dogs in Oklahoma, and specifically the myths associated with them. And this myth is that the fact that medical marijuana is now legal in Oklahoma doesn't change anything as far as a drug dog being used to establish probable cause. That's a myth. It should definitely change things. But that myth comes from a high authority, so you want to be aware of that. It comes from the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. That is the highest court for criminal cases in the state of Oklahoma. And it's from a case that was decided back June 17th of 2021 at State v. Roberson, 2021 OKCR 16. And in that case, it deals with an officer knowing that there is marijuana in a vehicle and whether that establishes probable cause to search that vehicle. It was Tulsa County. Judge Clifford Smith said that's not probable cause now that we have legal marijuana, and kicked the case. It was appealed by the state to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, and they reversed. And they said that decriminalization of marijuana for those holding medical marijuana licenses in no way affects a police officer's formation of probable cause based on the presence or odor of marijuana. So now this specifically deals with an officer smelling or being aware of marijuana, but then we definitely want to look at how does that affect a canine, a drug dog alerting to marijuana. So first, let's get a little bit of background on how canines are used. So under the Fourth Amendment, you cannot do a search without a warrant. That is unconstitutional. It is per se unreasonable. You've got to have a warrant. But there are certain exceptions. So exceptions to the warrant requirement, there's one called the automobile exception. And that's because the vehicle is mobile, therefore we don't have time to go get a warrant. The car will be gone by there, so we have to have an exception. But the exception requires probable cause that a crime is being committed. So if you have an automobile and probable cause that a crime is being committed, then you can search that vehicle without consent, without violating the Fourth Amendment, pursuant to the United States Supreme Court precedent. So how do you get probable cause to search? That's where the drug dog comes in. They run the drug dog around, the drug dog alerts, and that is supposed to be probable cause that a crime is, i.e. the possession of narcotics, is being committed. But these drug dogs don't know how to alert to a particular narcotic. They're trained to alert pretty much to 4 different ones, and the alerts are the same. So they tell the handler supposedly that they're alerting to one of those 4 smells. The handler does not know which one. So the fact that marijuana, one of those 4 things it's trained on, is now legal in Oklahoma for people that have a card, then that undermines it being probable cause. And it's more than that because we know of the magnificent acuity of the sense of smell of canines. They are picked specifically because they can smell so well. Some scientific reports say they can smell 40 times better or better at smelling than humans. I've had canine handlers testify that it's 1,000 times better, 100,000 times, 1,000,000 times better. Sometimes we use different analogies that, we may smell chili, but the dog smells each one of those individual ingredients in there. Okay, so they can definitely smell well, but that doesn't help them be reliable, particularly when we're talking about a legal industry in the state of Oklahoma because of transference and because of trace amounts. So, or transference and trace amounts. So we had an officer, canine officer testify in a preliminary hearing that if a crackhead was going around Walmart trying to open up every car, his dog would potentially alert to each one of those vehicles' handles because of the trace amount of crack cocaine that was on that person's hand that then transferred to the vehicle when they touched it. So that's talking about crack cocaine, which you're not going to see everywhere. But what about when we have this booming legal medical cannabis industry in the state of Oklahoma, where we have over 10,000 legal cannabis businesses, each with employees working there that not only, and then we have over 300,000 people in Oklahoma that are licensed to use marijuana. And it's not just them that's going to alert. If you're around somebody who's smoking it, if you go into a cannabis shop but don't even participate, all those scents are going to be on you. If you can smell it, a dog's going to be able to smell it way better. So if you can smell it, 1 out of 100 times, a dog may be able to smell it 99 out of 100 times. And that means that this smell of marijuana is going to be all over all these different areas where it wasn't before, and it's going to be perfectly legal. So the fact that an alert by a dog now has a much less chance that it's going to be alerting to something that's illegal and a much larger chance that it's going to be alerting to legal cannabis smell. Does that affect canine units being a probable cause that a crime is being committed? And the myth is that it doesn't have any effect at all, because that's what the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals wants us to believe based on their ruling in that other case. But that is a myth and it should be challenged. If you've got a case that is dealing with that, it is not enough to go along. You want to, differentiate between a human smelling it and a canine smelling it, because a human smelling it, that's going to mean that there's much larger concentration of marijuana if a human's going to smell it too. Human smelling marijuana can then say, oh, I smelled marijuana, not I smelled marijuana, or maybe it was cocaine, or maybe it was heroin, or maybe it was methamphetamine. I don't know which, but I smelled something. That's what it is from a dog. And then due to the acuity, it's a potentially much smaller amount. It could be a trace amount. It could be transference based on, you getting into an Uber car with somebody who smokes marijuana. You may not smell it at all, but it may be trace amounts in there that gets on your person that then it gets in your vehicle. It is alerted by a dog. So the fact is, with legal cannabis in Oklahoma, and it being such a booming business with so many users, so many dispensaries, grow operations, employees around it all the time, the likelihood that this is legal activity that the dog is alerting to has gone up a lot. So it should definitely factor in determining whether there is probable cause or not, and it should require much more than the alert of a canine to a potential smell of narcotics. The state should probably look at retraining those dogs to get them away from smelling marijuana, but at this point they're not incentivized to do that because the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals so far is saying it doesn't make any difference. But if we go up to a higher court or we look at a more constitutional standard, I think that you're going to find and agree with me that that's a myth, that it does factor in and it does make a difference in whether probable cause is established or not. If you're dealing with a case like this, you're probably going to want to talk to an attorney about your specific circumstances. Do so confidentially to get legal advice specific to you. To get that scheduled with somebody at my office, you can go online to makelaweasy.com.